we start today, I want to thank the $5 patron for this week, Joe Wagner. If you want to support the show, we're at patreon.com/metagame.fun, all written out. We do not rely on advertising revenue this time, and your patronage helps us pay for the cost of bandwidth, website upkeep, the inherent cost of production, and more. So please consider supporting us if you like these conversations. And, we also have a little Discord channel if you like that. So the topic for today is both critics as artists and artists as critics. It's multifaceted. For example, in 1970, Roger Ebert, now like the epitome of a film critic, co-wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which is a satirical melodrama with Russ Meyer, sort of an exploitation filmmaker. Not exploitation, more like a B filmmaker. Ebert described it as a satire of Hollywood conventions, genres, situations, dialogue, characters, and success formulas heavily overlaid with such shocking violence that some critics didn't know whether the movie knew it was a comedy. But it was a hit. It made over $40 million in the box office on a $2 million budget, and it was a cult classic. People still talk about it. And after a few more scripts with Russ Meyer, Ebert never really returned to writing films. Likewise, in January 2007, Greg Kasavin, then editor-in-chief of GameSpot, resigned and began working at several studios, first Electronic Arts as an associate producer on Command & Conquer 3, and then 2K Games as a producer on Spec Ops: The Line, before finally joining Supergiant Games, where he wrote and creative directed Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, which are some major independent releases with amazing critical reception. It doesn't really happen enough, I think. Critics and developers trading these roles. It leads to captivating experiences when we're developing a release, and it leads to really fresh insights when we're critiquing the medium. And so this time, I just wanted to talk about the divide between critic and artist and our own experiences with the divide, taking off from what you suggested last episode. Just because when you mentioned it, I got really like, oh yeah, really intrigued by it.
Yeah, it's something you see a lot in music history. In the 19th and 18th centuries, you saw a lot of esteemed composers also writing weekly music reviews. Schubert was a notable proponent of Beethoven and of Chopin in like monthly periodicals. So you saw a lot of this where composers would even elevate each other's works, but then also take that into their own writing. You see, not to harp on Schubert, but Schubert and Beethoven, there's a long-lasting communication between them musically, where Schubert's constantly recalling Beethoven's influence, and those influences are things that Schubert, as a critic, was a big proponent of. You see it in film history in the 70s and the 60s with the French New Wavers, Godard, Truffaut, all of them. But yeah, in games, it seems like these two roles basically exist on either side of a fence, and the rare few who actually get over that fence typically go on to do things that, like Greg Kasavin, people really like. But it's strange to me that we don't see more of that, I guess.
Oh, what was the first example? Like, was it music for you first that you were first noticing this trend, or?
I think just in my education, probably Godard and Truffaut, and like those. It's so with those directors, it's so, that point is so over belabored that they were film critics. That's like part of what people attribute their genre blending, the success they had there, and like Godard being able to reinvent different cuts and add different pieces to the cinematic lexicon. That all is often attributed to the fact that they were critics. Similarly, I think to use your example, I think Bastion and Transistor are two games. I haven't touched Pyre, but I think those two are games that similarly take sort of an understanding of the way that play intersects with time, and then those two games use that intersection of play and time to inject narrative, like a rolling narrative that responds to the player and adds such a living quality to those worlds. When in actuality they're pretty minimal worlds. They just feel very large because they feel large and alive and breathing because the game is constantly responding to what you're doing in a way that feels very cut from an academic cloth, I guess.
The thing about the Kaiju Cinema critics was that they weren't often just critiquing; they were theorizing. They have a whole typology for, I think it was the political nature of film, and which films were the best in that regard, based on their worth as a political statement. If I'm recalling correctly, it's been a few years. And Truffaut often originated auteur theory before it was carried here by Andrew Sarris. And then you see him in like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and you're like, yeah, what are you doing here? This is adorable. I love this, but also, what are you doing here?
Mm-hmm.
I remember when we were taking film classes, we would describe it as like it's like as if they were part of like this whole world of stars, that they had graduated beyond like just being critics or being members of our study, and were instead like just another kind of celebrity, like Cary Grant was.
Yeah. I'm reminded also, jumping off the Close Encounters, I'm reminded also of that sequence in Pierre Le Fou. It's a Godard film from, I want to say 73, but I might be wrong there. But anyway, there's a scene in Pierre Le Fou where they're at a party, and just out of nowhere, I think it's Samuel Fuller, but a popular director at the time, a popular art director that kind of crossed into the mainstream, is just at a party and just delivers a monologue in complete English. It's a French language film. If the title didn't give it away.
Oh, I think I've seen this. Is this the one where they're just dancing?
They're just dancing, and then Samuel. No, this is in color. This is one of the first Godard in color. It's a very colorful film.
Okay, I might be thinking of something else.
But they're at a party, and like Samuel Fuller just gives this like unprompted, just gives this monologue on like the nature of love, and then he exits the film. That's it. Nobody says who he is. Nobody, like, there's no expectation. Like the onus is on the audience to know who that is, or else to just like take that moment and then discard it. And that speaks to a lot in terms of how Godard operates as a film director and also as a critic, that he just like has such an understanding of everything around him that he knows that bringing Fuller in lends a certain quality to that sequence, and then expects some portion of the audience to know who that is and to respond in kind. Like that, I always find that kind of always in like pretty much as a rule, I find any use of a form that asks the audience to do a little bit of dot connecting in order to understand the point it's making. I find that really, really compelling, and I find that usually comes out of a more critical or academic field.
But likewise, like I know a lot of film directors who are only regarded as enthusiasts. You're looking at Martin Scorsese, you're looking at like Quentin Tarantino, and like have they reviewed films? Like, have they done anything else besides just like really like them and make? I guess Tarantino has the film festival, right?
Well, he has the stupid lists too.
Does he?
He did a list, and he was like really contrarian about it. He put like some really bad movies in his top 10.
I know that the reason that why Chungking Express was so acclaimed in the States was after Tarantino was like, you gotta see this.
Tarantino, okay.
Yeah, Tarantino.
Chungking doesn't seem like okay.
But like everyone at film school would say, I may not like Scorsese's films, but I want to get a beer with him.
Sure.
Like I want to just talk film with Scorsese.
Marty.
Not with Marty. But I don't. Has he done like
film criticism? I have to assume all of those guys did in the 70s.
Because like I think he was educated, much like say Godard and company were.
Yeah, Scorsese certainly is. But I mean, all of this, it's weird because Scorsese and Godard are examples of this kind of crossover person. Scorsese being an academic, if not a critic. This kind of crossover person, kind of sticking to the more of the critical sphere. In these groups, you have also examples, Truffaut and like Lucas. Not to draw the loosest comparison between two directors ever. It's a
great combo.
Yeah, let's pair. Here's a fun game for you at home. Pair Radioland Murders with the 400 Blows, and see how much you get. Tucker, you really want to take Tucker, the Man in His Dream, and put it with Jules at Gym. You'll love it. It's a great pairing. But I think Jules at Gym was Truffaut. Anyway, French film. I can't keep them straight. But those directors went for a more crossover appeal. I think Truffaut is definitely the most like populist. Like he's a popular filmmaker in French film of the time, more so than I would say Godard. Just looking at box office, than Godard was. And same with Lucas. I think Scorsese is a well-known name, but people don't really churn out for Scorsese. Like, Silence didn't perform. He has his share of just like films that just do well in the critical sphere and then just fizzle out. And Hugo did pretty well.
What happens in Hugo? I don't.
It's like a Méliès tribute. It's a Méliès milieu. Damn, that's good. But yeah, I think we don't even have that kind of variety. Like in games like Eureka 7, and then you have the Fulbright, like Steve Gaynor in them, and also the Campo Santo.
Is Gaynor a critic?
I mean, Idle Thumbs, like
I've never seen Idle Thumbs. This is me betraying my gap.
Oh,
I've never seen anything.
So Idle Thumbs is a group of developers who mostly worked at Double Fine. Some of them worked with Steve Gaynor.
This isn't even like a series. This is like a group of people.
Podcast.
It's
a podcast network.
Damn it.
Yeah, they do what we do. We're ripping them off. So they work. They all worked at like Double Fine and Telltale and etc. And they got together and talked about like games and how they feel about it. They still do. They do a lot of shows now. But now they also run Campo Santo, and that led to obviously Firewatch, which was a game that was critically acclaimed and did also use kind of formal peculiarities of games in a way narrativistically that most games and no other media could. Yeah, I would consider that an example of this as well. And I find Firewatch really compelling. So I guess there are, and that game also performed well. So better, I would say, than my understanding of like what Transistor. So I guess there are, but that really is that I can think of.
What about the other way?
Designers that become critics?
That's difficult. I mean, I wrote that one piece for Polygon the one time, and like people were telling me like, oh man, I've been waiting for this for so long. I've been waiting for game developers to write about other games. And then I sort of realized, oh yeah, what else is, like, who else is doing this?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk lately about how a lot of people don't feel safe or comfortable doing that because of gaming audiences. And I don't really want to get too much into gaming audiences and how awful they are, but yeah, I mean, that I think feeds part of it. I think also just the way that the industry's like the industry side of the industry seems set up. It seems like the indie space, or whatever this space is now, I don't know that indie space is the right term for it anymore. But whatever this space is now, that seems a little bit more accommodating to allowing developers the space to actually talk about their experiences. But for every Polygon piece on Mass Effect Andromeda you write, you also get one saying, espousing the virtues of crunch.
I do remember that one.
That was a fun.
It was
week.
This year.
That was a fun discourse. It's been a long year. But even like those things, that's not. I don't even know that what you were writing is necessarily criticism in the way that we're talking.
It was about using your viewpoint as an artist to talk about why another piece of art affected you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, and in that I think it functions more as kind of an op-ed,
mm-hmm.
Which certainly is not criticism, but it's also not like you don't have a column, and yeah, but some like. I can't think of a game developer who went off and said, "No, I just want a column at this like magazine.
I'm done being creatively fulfilled. I want to just talk about it.
I just want to talk shit now." This game sucks. I could have done this better.
What about like, have you read much of Gamma Sutra?
Yeah, I read a friend. Gamma Sutra.
Oh,
rhymes with Kama Sutra.
I thought it was like a developer focused kind of site.
It is, yeah. It's mostly. I mean, it's a jobs board.
Oh.
It's developer focused. So, I mean, any criticism there is mostly coming from a technical or like a production-based standpoint.
Or like a postmortem or something.
It's self-criticism.
Yeah, postmortems are like probably the only thing I ever see from devs. Like the only thing that they ever talk about is their own stuff. Or like their process.
Yeah. And the postmortem is a remarkably recent phenomenon. But everybody's getting in on it. Like,
have you seen the ones from GDC? Have you gone through all of them? 'Cause I had a period where I just watched all of the classic ones. I was like, yeah, I want to know what Doom was like. Yeah, tell me about it. Or like Diablo, and the Diablo guy was like, yeah, Crunch was great. I loved it every minute. And that was the whole presentation.
I haven't watched a lot of them. I've watched a couple. I watched Yu Suzuki on Shenmue, because of course I did. And I really want to see Yu Saito talk about Seaman, because that game's really important to me. But I have watched a couple of them, and it typically does fall more from like a production. It's more like, well, these were the challenges, and this is how we overcame them. And then like, here's a funny aside about like what we were doing. There's one really good one from this year, on Breath of the Wild, that people went really, really like bonkers for, where they talk about kind of the philosophy of play that fed into Zelda, and what, how they attempted to make that game fun. Does that function as criticism though in the same way? Because it's not. I mean, it's not.
I guess like not. I think you're right to focus on the idea of a column as an example, because it does give you an ongoing material to investigate similar themes or problems or dialogues in, as opposed to just here's our production compared to other productions, or here's the challenge of finding fun.
Mm-hmm. Whereas, if film can have its film crit Hulk, when do games get our games crit James Pond?
It's James Pond.
all my Pondies out there, you know what's up.
I don't. Is that
James Pond?
Did you activate somebody? What was that?
Operation Robocod. James Pond was a mascot platformer on the Super Famicom.
Oh,
by I think UK devs. There was like 4 of them. It's like a Bubsy.
I was just sitting here and I was thinking, like, could I ever see myself getting like a collective of developers and saying, now we're going to make a journal, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about other people's work once a month or whatever.
I think that would be great.
I think it will be fun, but I can't see it actually operating in earnest, because like it would take away from this ongoing train where we're always making things.
Mm-hmm.
Like it always felt like if I wanted to comment on an idea, it would be better suited by iterating on it in my own little thing.
Mm-hmm. I suppose so, though. I mean, that begs a lot of questions. Like, what is the function of a journal of letters in 2017, or what function? Who is that for? Because I feel like, for better or worse, I feel like in pop music circles, high-minded, like pseudo-academic theorizing about like pop music and its structure and its meaning and its form isn't gated off in the same way that I think academic games theory is. Games academics tend to operate in a very, very isolated sphere, whereas like your average Pitchfork article is just a stone's throw away from this kind of theory when it comes to pop. Again, for better or worse. But I wonder what that genre of criticism is for, or who it's for, if not just for the artist's own illumination, in which case it's cousin to masturbation. But what and this gets back to the question I think we raised kind of in the first episode, where are the Giant Bomb guys critics and folks now? Are the Giant Bomb folks critics? And if they are, and if they went and made a Giant Bomb game and they all did it, would that be the same thing as what we're describing?
Well, I mean, the Game Grumps guys did that.
And I would say that is not the same thing as what we're describing. But that might, that's a combination of taste.
Because they're entertainers less than critics, whereas like the Giant Bomb folks were critics who became entertainers.
Mm-hmm.
They walk that line by like, they get review copies and they review them because they have, like, we have the skills to review this game if we need to, but most of the time we're just going to play our own thing.
Yeah. And that seemed, I mean, not to revive that question, but that seems like what that seems where the majority of people live. And the people who live so far into the critic sphere that there might be an interesting conceptual, like, execution from them, I don't know that it would even be noticed. I don't like that about Greg, that never gets brought up. And whether or not it's brought up is kind of moot, but it's only to a point. To a point, it is important, like to be observing how like a critic approaches this form versus how somebody who went to school for it versus somebody who's self-taught. How techniques and attitudes and philosophies of play are how we understand what a game is. And I think the potential gain of having a critical-minded person making a game would be that that person would be able to manipulate or in some way work over the concepts that are inherent to play or that form in such a way that it is surprising and inspiring. But I don't know who that is.
I think it takes a lot of love for the medium to live in it for decades, realize patterns of sort of ideas or of different kinds of play that are missing, and saying I want to be able to make that, and I will, because it needs to be there. I mean, maybe I'm romanticizing it. Maybe it's just, hey, it'd be cool to make a salary this way.
Yeah, that tends to be, I think, how most people approach stuff here. Yeah, I think, and I mean, I certainly, there were times where I had like aspirations of being a critic in music and games. And, I tried my hand at it and it didn't really work for me because I find that I'm so mired in the doing that being able to step outside the actual function and like the execution of that and be able to see it from kind of a holistic standpoint is it feels stifling. It feels like I'm not fully executing on either if I start to pull myself away. Like if I start to think about composition, like video game music composition, a certain way, then my own composition starts to suffer, and then also I don't feel like I'm fully scratching the surface of what I'm trying to say about others' composition. So really, there's no value in doing that for me because both avenues of that fail. That's been a frustration because I've wanted to for a long time get into criticism because there's that romantic notion. I heavily romanticize the Fluxus movement, Cage and John Cage and Merce Cunningham and all of those folks, and they were all very straddling the line between academia and sort of that point where the popular meets the surreal. They were sort of living in that space and creating things that resonated really far out. But that takes a certain perspective.
Well, I mean, that's why we're here, I think.
Yeah.
Is that like that thing I described with romanticizing Greg Kasavin or Kasavins? Kasavin? Okay. His notion to go and creative direct a few games. It happened with me because I was becoming really aware of what drove me as an artist. And when people would say, "Why do you make stuff?" I would say, "Oh, I prioritize a system of interactions that is analogous to the way we operate with computers as opposed to navigating a world, because I believe that clicking is the same as walking. Or that, that navigating a space that's just words and text can feel a lot like walking around in like Fallout or something, just by notion of the automatic processes by which we sort and understand these information day in, day out. Like, I know that. I know what makes me like,
right,
ooh, I should make that. And because I couldn't hear anyone else say that, I couldn't hear anyone else to differentiate between, the kinds of generic typologies that describe interaction versus the generic typologies that describe actual genre. It was all just sort of collapsed in this loosey-goosey way where people were like saying, "Oh, that's a third-person clicker," when it's like that's what you're doing. That's not a genre,
right?
And so I wanted to take some time, like something in the background, to be like, okay, so here's the conversations that I want people to be having. Let's have them.
Yeah, and those conversations tend to center more around questions of form than they do questions of content. Which is what I think. I mean, I think that there need to be more conversations about that. I am reminded, though, to the question of has it ever gone the other way. I'm sorry for everybody who is of a certain persuasion, but I'm about to bring up Kojima, because he is doing that now, but he's not doing it with games. Kojima is now writing column like a regular. He has a regular column in, I think, like Esquire or some men's magazine, of course, where he talks about film. He talks about film that's inspiring him and how he internalizes and views it. And I disagree with him so fucking strongly every time he does it. And I am a huge Kojima fan. I'm sorry. But, like, that is, and it's interesting to me that he is specifically not talking about games. I know that 70% of his body is movies, but even still, you would expect him to sort of, if he's going to have a column, maybe talk about like some of the games that are inspiring him. But no, it's just, here's what I think about the new Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how much of that is just, I mean, sure, Kojima can do whatever he wants, I suppose, at this point. So he could certainly be talking about Portopia or whatever other games inspired him. But he also is specific, like, it's strange to me that he's specifically talking about movies that exist outside the milieu of what we consider, like what we point to when we think of Kojima. And I wonder how much of that is pressure from publishers or from editors or etc., or just expectations. Like, this is what, of course, this is what you talk about. So
it's intriguing because I can't think of an experience where it's like, oh yeah, Hideo Kojima is hanging out with another game developer. It's like, no, he's hanging out with Del Toro, and they're best buddies now.
Mads are in love,
and like he doesn't bring the games people into film. He brings the directors into games, and he's like, the games is what I do. That's just it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of course, he didn't actually say that, but in terms of like what he's doing by action, it's all about bringing in a medium that he covets into the thing that he knows how to do.
Yeah.
Do you know of him, like, just chillaxing with,
I know he's close friends with Jeff Keighley, and I know that he seems to be pretty palsy with Mark Cerny. But these are all people who, in one way or another, there's a power dynamic there, right? Like, Mark Cerny is a higher up at PlayStation, so when you're a new independent developer who's mostly found success on PlayStation, like, you're going to be friends with the PlayStation guy. It's just the way it works over, how old is Metal Gear? 19 years now. Metal Gear Solid turns 20 next year, and that's fucking with me. But Metal Gear is like 30. Metal Gear. Sorry.
Why isn't he hanging out with John Carpenter?
John Carpenter fucking hates Metal Gear.
Oh, well, that explains a lot then.
He resents it. I was in an interview with John Carpenter once where somebody asked him, what do you think about Metal Gear ripping off Escape from New York? And he's like, I don't know what the fuck this is. Like, this guy came up to me, he was really excited, and I was just like, whatever, man. Just fuck off.
Which guy?
Kojima. The best thing about Kojima's Twitter, other than Big Corn and all of that, is that most of the time he's just posting like, hey, I'm listening to New Order right now. And it's like, okay.
Just like me.
Yeah, every morning he just slams New Order into his Zune and then
calls up Del Toro. It was like, you'll never guess what I got up next. It involves oil.
And he, I don't know, buys some Godzilla action figures. So that's Kojima. But, yeah, that's an example, the only example. And again, another part of this, I think, is that we don't humanize individuals in game development in the same way that we do in film. Yeah, the director has sort of an esteemed status, most of which is not deserved. But we elevate. Roger Deakins, the cinematographer for the Coen brothers, is not considered by the general public to be as important or necessary a figure in the creative artistic process, just by virtue of them not knowing who he is, as the Coen brothers are. Even though I would say that Roger Deakins' contribution to their work often is the big, like, he's bringing so much to the table with their work and with other people's work. He's elevated so many not great films, Blade Runner 2049, and that person is not elevated or heralded in the same way that Steven Spielberg or David Lynch or whoever else is. And we only have so many of those in games. Bringing up Kojima is like, well, I've knocked out 1/3 of them now, which I always wonder how much of a good thing that is, that we don't, like, auteur theory, especially in games, is a fallacy, but there's I don't think anything wrong with humanizing individuals who are bringing a consistent and coherent vision and thought process to games.
I always felt that way about editors, that editors make or break a film's pacing and tone, and when a director loses an editor and gets somebody else, that film always suffers.
Yeah.
But no one seems to draw the line.
Yeah, editors are, like, Star Wars is a film that was garbage, apparently, before going to the editing room. And Tarantino is a director who before her passing, he had a longtime editor who, you know, he considered to be like somebody, you know, necessary to his process. I think Hateful Eight's the only film he's made without her. Maybe she passed before Django. I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, I feel like those individuals don't ever get called out, and we have historically we have some. We have, you know, at Atari there were a number of them. There are obviously businessmen like Nolan Bushnell and etc., but there were a number of famous programmers and like noted designers at Atari. You have, you know, once computer culture starts to rise up and you have id and all those companies, you really start to see individuals start to come to the fore. John Romero and John Carmack, etc. At Nintendo, you have Miyamoto. And that's it. It's not it, but
Tezuka.
You have Tezuka. You have
made the hardest Mario game ever.
You have Tezuka. You have Iwata. Obviously, you have Eiji Aino. He's the Zelda guy.
Yeah.
You also have Sakurai.
But I still don't know if these are like I don't know anymore whether or not we are talking inside baseball or whether or not people know these people.
Yeah, people know who Shigeru Miyamoto is because they put him out in front of people.
But we're saying Carmack. Even Carmack.
Yeah.
I think he's revered among like 90s nerds, but afterward, do people really know who John Carmack is?
I don't think so. Yeah, I always remember when I was a kid and I saw the Daikatana ad, I remember being very confused. I knew who John Romero was, so I was not confused as to who was making me his bitch. But what I was confused by as a kid was that this ad would presume to expect like any general, like random person to look at it and go, oh yeah, John Romero, he's gonna make me his bitch. Like I always found that even as a kid to be like, what? Why?
You're so excited about it. Hey, John Romero,
make me your bitch. Daikatana. The game's not as bad as people say. Anyway, like it's not good, but come on, it's not terrible. Anyway, yeah, I always found that interesting and like confusing. Sega had, I think, a number of like auteurs that, not auteurs, but like creative voices: Reiko Kodama, Yu Suzuki, Yuji Naka.
But here's the thing, though. We're referring to myth. Always.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like the people at id kind of cultivated a mythology around 4 guys in a shack eating pizza and drinking Diet Coke, and they made Doom.
Sure. But didn't also Sam Raimi or like
yeah, but like we don't point to new auteurs today in the same way because there was a sort of a period of time in which there was a mythology of these auteurs. In the same way that you would say at Sega, you know, the 3 or 4 people who headed different studios inside Sega. This is me talking out of my ass, admittedly.
You're getting there. Right? I mean, you're not wrong, especially during the Dreamcast era.
What about now? Like, I think that the things that we chose to uphold or to condemn kind of fell in as myths do. Like, for example, like Daikatana, like, it's just sort of reverse revered. Like, it's like gamers just know it because they watched their big brothers on YouTube and they were like, Daikatana was bad and that ad was very famous. Like,
sure. Or like E.T. E.T. is not a terrible game. It's actually pretty forward thinking. And I know I sound like one of those like Showgirls is great. Actually, people, Showgirls is great, actually. But yeah, I mean, we believe our own bullshit in terms of what we choose to mythologize in this space, and you know, at some point, you would hope to see that criticized and like questioned from the inside, which is why I do find it strange that, like, for example, Kojima is somebody that I feel like probably has opinions about like where games are and where games have been. I feel like Metal Gear Solid 5 is a game that's very, very reactive to like the modern game space. Like it's screaming how like much it is paying attention to everything that's going on around it. In stark contrast to Metal Gear Solid 4, which feels kind of like a relic, which I think is a noted, like a considered choice considering its narrative. But like I would like to hear what that designer thinks about all of those things that he's responding to through play, just to better conceptualize them. And I don't know where that mythos goes away unless we start to like I don't know. What about maybe this really like maybe Jurassic Park Trespasser wasn't this like massive like huge thing that we like that it was oh wow a physics system finally. Maybe there were these other things that were cumulatively building up to that, and then it was just another step in a progression of things. I
mean, yeah, this is very narcissistic, but this is guiding pretty much everything I do. It's about destroying nostalgia. It's about reclaiming, the messy game. It was all about destroying myth. It was all about taking people away from that initial conception that became fact or became canon and deciding for yourselves.
Yeah.
And that's the only way we can free ourselves of that sort of mythology that keeps us from making more auteurs or finding more auteurs or having people speak. It's because, some point in the 90s, we were like, oh yeah, John Carmack, John Romero, these two guys, most important man of all games. That's it. We're done.
But what about Roberta Williams?
Is that Burger Becky?
Roberta Williams? She did,
No. I mean, like, that was her name, right? Her nickname.
Was it?
Yeah, I don't know. I read a piece, an interview that was given to her in No Don't Die, or...
David Walensky.
Yeah, it's very good. By the way, if you haven't read his series, go to nodon'tdie.com.
Yeah, he's really good.
It's just called Don't Die, but for some reason the URL is that. But yeah, like she's done so much work, and I think that she sort of just walks past the crowds at GDC, and no one seems to notice.
There was a time when she was heralded, but there's a lot of things that contribute to that. A lot of systemic things that exist way outside games that contribute to that particular overshadowing. But yeah, I would like to see Roberta Williams have like thoughts on where, like even something as frivolous as microtransactions, like the thing that we're talking about right now. We dating the podcast right now in games discourse, the big thing is microtransactions and how awful they are.
It's just the same old. We don't want to pay anymore.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to get into that discourse. Stupid loot boxes, whatever. Where's my single player experiences?
Where's my 16 games for $1?
I want 30 hours of content and story for $60. Near. But yeah, like Yoko Taro. Like we have examples of these now.
I didn't hear about him until he was on stage wearing that moon helmet.
Yeah. Where's that? I don't know.
I have to play through his oeuvre. Livre.
Wavri.
I
don't think they say it.
But yeah, I think that's a great example. But also still rare. Like,
yeah. And
what makes him come up and other people don't? Like, who made Killer is Dead again?
That is Suda51. I was just thinking of. He's an auteur. Yeah, he started off with a couple of PC and PlayStation adventure games, The Silver Case, which was recently translated finally, and it's really good. And then he made Flower, Sun, and Rain, which is fucking amazing. And then he made Killer 7, which is also fucking amazing. And then he just made a bunch of big pop culture mash-em-up action games that have really floaty mechanics and don't really make much sense. And they're very loud, and they sort of look like a 12-year-old ate a lot of Fun Dip, like a lot of that sugar that's just pure sugar, and just watched MTV for 25 hours and then made a game. It's sort of what all his games are like now, and they're really, really grating, and I don't know what happened. But even that feels like at least he is operating in conversation and in concert with culture. One of those games, Lollipop Chainsaw, was designed in collaboration with James Gunn, who wrote the Scooby-Doo films and now directs Guardian of the Galaxy sequels for Marvel. So, yeah.
But is there, like, now I'm just wondering whether or not there is sort of like a cultural divide in the way that we've organized this art form that allows certain people to be privileged access to a voice on the cultural stage. Like, I know that there was that Don't Die interview with Warren Spector I thought was really good because he was just talking about how the Deus Ex games that come out now are really good and he likes them a lot because they really get what he was going for. But at the same time, I also think that Warren Spector gets recognized because of his proximity to Romero. Like he was at the North Iron Storm, I believe, or was it? I don't think it was Austin. I think he was North Iron Storm, and because of that, like, he gets access to being part of Myth. because of his sure approximation like of Romero's ideas and how he perfected it in his immersive sim.
Mm-hmm. And bringing up Warren Spector makes my mind immediately go to Rand and Robin Miller, who founded Cyan Worlds and made Myst. It's like those they did a lot, and they Myst as, and I think this gets to the heart of it. Myst as a piece of software and as a cultural phenomenon is something that is very, very deeply ingrained and understood and just taken for granted. But Myst as the product of a group of individuals all working creatively, I think Robin Miller wrote the music for Myst and had never written music before. Unless I'm misremembering. I believe that is the story. And the score to Myst is amazing. Myst is a fucking incredible game. And those folks, when they were beginning to do crowdfunding for Abduction, which is also an amazing game, there was a lot of they had to go, oh, we made Myst. Remember Myst? That's that legendary game Myst. Instead of being able to just say, oh, hey, we're Rand and Robin Miller. Which, if John Carmack was out here give me money, Shenmue 3 didn't really need Yu Suzuki just had to walk on and be like, I'm Yu Suzuki, you know who I am. And so there's a disparity there, and I think a lot of it comes to just how these games end up being marketed as the product of an individual versus the product of a studio. I tend to not really think of Metal Gear Solid as a Konami product in the same way that I do think of Silent Hill as a Konami product, even though I am sure there is an individual creative mind behind the majority of Silent Hill. But because Metal Gear Solid was always advertised as kind of an auteur, filmic experience by Hideo Kojima, esteemed designer Hideo Kojima, then that becomes just even internally for me, my narrative of it. Same with Yu Suzuki, same with Roberta Williams until that dropped off, same with the id Boys. And I until we start to see, it would be so, I think, heartening and exciting to see people start to come out of that space and just trickle over here and just reflect, talk at it from the other side, which is what I liked so much about your piece, and what seeing things like Idle Thumbs. That was what Idle Thumbs was what brought me into the space, because it was so refreshing to see people whose job it is to make these things talk about them, their own things, and then the things they're engaging with in reasoned and critical ways.
I think you're really onto something in regards to studio culture. For example, when Runic shut down last week, rest in peace. The folks at Giant Bomb would just say, those Runic guys made another Diablo, and it was really great. And I don't know who the Runic guys are, but I don't think that it was an accident. I think Runic deliberately constructed their studio identity around having a sort of a joint set of values or a mission statement to make a certain kind of game. And when I was in film school writing about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1955 version, a lot of it came down to Monogram and allied artists sort of consolidating their strategy and creating a belief in the quality of the studio, not in the quality of the actors, not in the quality of the director. It was about trusting Monogram. Monogram will always provide good quality.
Yeah.
And so they would purposefully build their films to put the big seal at the front of it saying a Monogram production, so that you would know that Monogram values certain things, and it didn't really matter that I'm blanking, Don Siegel directed it, or that you had McCarthy in the starring role. They did great jobs. And Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a phenomenal film. It's amazing that it was made on such a small budget, but I think that it came down to being part of a studio culture that privileged the voice of the company.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Barton Fink, not to keep harping on the Coen brothers, but the two phrases that always stick out in my mind the most about Barton Fink are the studio head repeatedly referring to that Barton Fink feeling, but also very, very, very strongly making sure that it's made aware that this is a capital picture by Capitol Pictures, and Capitol Pictures means quality. They don't make B movies, right? So you have this notion of the studio that's very, very strongly going, no, we respect the artist. The artist is king here. Capitol Pictures is actually the line. I've seen this movie way too many times. Barton Fink, it's great.
It's really good.
It's really good. Judy Davis is in it. Judy Davis was in Naked Lunch and Barton Fink the same year. It was 1991. Judy Davis was killing it.
Red Letter.
She's great. Anyway, so you think about that dichotomy of oh no, the artist is king here, but Capitol Pictures, don't forget that. And now we're starting to see the way that nostalgia is now being, because games are now at a point where like people who were raised on them are now the ones who have purchasing power. You see like Nintendo is so heavily leaning into nostalgia, such that like Splatoon has a zapper as a weapon, and like Konami, like fucking the new Bomberman has like you can play as Vic Viper but a Bomberman, and like Pyramid Head but a Bomberman. Like I don't know. Like they're regurgitating now just so that they can reinforce back into like Konami. Konami is Gradius. Konami is Silent Hill. Konami is this and this and this.
Yeah.
Sega has poorly done this or tried to.
Do you want to go around Sonic Forces as knights?
Sonic Forces is knights, but also Persona, which seems to muddy that brand somewhat because they do keep Sega separate from Atlas. So I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to, as consumer, go, oh yeah, Sega, they made Persona, but I don't see Sega on it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm 12, and I guess I look like Persona boy now. So yeah, this prioritization of the studio over prioritization of the individual, I think, is part of what prevents us from getting so many individuals to step outside of.
The companies are silencing those voices.
Sure.
Like, who directed Super Mario Odyssey? I don't know.
I don't either.
They're going to trot out Miyamoto, they're going to trot out Tezuka, they're going to trot out Aonuma, and they're going to talk about the game that they had a little bit of involvement in as executive producer. And that's who we get access to in their Nintendo Directs. It's directly made to have us see certain people as the voice of the company, but also as voices of their own artistic ideas. But like in that same way, like they have to cultivate an association of their company as a brand, and that means creating a mythology of their characters. You know, Nintendo's a toy company.
Yeah.
Creating new auteurs is not their raison d'etre.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, Nintendo's newest and like at this point third most popular. Like Nintendo very, very nakedly goes, okay, we're Mario, we're Zelda, and we're whatever. For a while it was Animal Crossing, and right now in this moment it's Splatoon. And Splatoon is interesting because Splatoon is a game that is like famously, from people who know this, made by new blood in Nintendo, which so rarely happens because it's just an old company and everybody there's old. So the fact that Splatoon, a game that comes from new blood, is so popular and so important to Nintendo as a brand to be positioned. Like, who are those new people? I want to know who they are. I want to hear from them. I don't want to hear from Reggie about how this new Splatoon pack, or Bill Trinan or whoever, like these marketing people who are trotted out and like become the face of the company. I would like to hear from like the developers of Splatoon, what they were like, how they were drawing from Harajuku style, and like where all of this music is coming from, because the music is so like diverse in like style and genre. Like you see there, sometimes you get an interview with like the Persona devs where they're like, well, this is what we were thinking about here, here, and here, and here, and here. But that's run in like a tiny magazine that nobody sees. And like those directors and producers and developers and like designers aren't put forward in the same way that mostly people who just put money behind things are. Yeah, I can't. Besides the Persona 5 director, I can't think of, and Shoji Meguro, the composer. I can't think of a person working on Shin Megami Tensei. Kaneko, the artist, is another one. But like, yeah, it's rare. It's so rare to see. And in like, you know, over here we have our Todd Howards, but
I've never heard Todd Howard speak. I think he's just become a bit of a meme.
Oh,
have you heard Todd Howard say anything?
Yeah, I have. I watch E3 every year.
Oh, he's the one on stage.
He goes on stage.
Is that it?
He's Bethesda.
That's it.
He's Todd Bethesda.
Oh, but we're not memeing on Sony with like Andrew House.
No, or God, what's the guy now? Steven. I forget his name. Anyway, yeah. It's got a face. It's really cool.
I'm really happy with him having a face.
Yeah, I'm glad Sony's representatives have faces. David Cage.
Come on.
I just felt like bringing David Cage into this.
What studio is he with? Is it Quantic Dream? Who are they with?
Quantic Dream's Microsoft.
Microsoft? Oh my god. That's our auteur at Microsoft. We have David Cage.
No. David Cage is Sony. Quantic Dream did Alan Wake.
Ah, damn. I'm thinking of something else then.
Yeah.
What's this company?
I don't know David Cage's fucking company.
I thought it was Quantic Dream.
No.
He has a company. They made Omicron. They made Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
I thought they were Quantum Dream.
No, maybe they are. I try not to think about David Cage. Fucking Detroit. But yeah, what passed for auteurs now are people who are easily and neatly associated with a certain set of mechanics, basically. Todd Howard is associated with the Elder Scrolls Fallout type of gameplay. David Cage
he's just an avatar of the company.
Yeah.
But that's not an auteur, that's just PR.
Yeah, he's just a marketing man, basically. I mean, I'm sure he has ideas, I'm sure he contributes to development, but
I don't know what Todd Howard thinks he feels. I know what Bethesda will provide me, and I think that's what they want.
Well, and I know what Bethesda values in an RPG experience and what they think is important and interesting in that.
Yeah.
And the assumption, I guess, is that Todd Howard is that person who's making those choices.
Or like Gabe Newell. He's just
he's just a guy.
He just really likes being a joke, I guess.
Knives.
Yeah, Gabe N. He's gonna do a thing.
Well, Valve is a whole other question, though.
These aren't auteurs in the same way that we would consider, Hideo Kojima. These are people who are just doing PR because they don't want to pay a PR person.
Yeah.
These are people who can just give the company values without giving their own opinion. And what I want, personally, is to have a director of a game be able to talk about it before it comes out or when it comes out. I want a blog post backed by a company as to what they were going for, and I want the company to support them. Mm-hmm. I want people to feel like they can talk about their own work without being hunted down by strangers, and I want the support of a corporation to bolster that individual voice.
I'm reminded of something that I really appreciated from Sega, of course, but on the 3DS, Sega has a collection of 3D archives where they take Mega Drive and arcade games and they port them down to 3DS and they give them 3D capabilities. They use a second-party developer named M2. M2 does this. And M2 is a bunch of mostly game nerds, and something Sega does that I really appreciate. First off, these ports are incredibly detailed and incredibly accurate. And M2 has gone to the extent of building their own emulator they call it Giga Drive, that works within 3DS frameworks that can replicate precisely the Mega Drive's chipset. They went to the extent of taking Fantasy Zone 2, a Master System game, and making a System 16 version of that game on arcade hardware that played on arcade hardware, and then downporting that into the 3DS just so they could have an arcade version of a game that was never released on arcade hardware. So M2, they put a lot of effort into these things, and I really appreciate that from a historical preservation standpoint. But something I love about Sega is that when these ports would come out on the Sega blog, they would host here's two guys from M2 that worked on this, and this. They're going to talk about the process. Oh, we went in and we took the Outrun board and we recorded audio of the fans on the Outrun board so that you could hear it in the mix, so that it felt like you were they go into all this detail about each little particular thing, and this. They kept doing these little interviews to such an extent that you got a sense of who these people were and what they individually prioritized and valued. And then when one of them passed away, 2 or 3 years ago, one of them passed away. It was really sad. People had an understanding of not only what that person did and contributed to these releases, but were saddened by that person, because they felt like they had an emotional connection to him, which is so much different than if Kojima or Yu Suzuki or Shigeru Miyamoto, when Iwata died, everybody was really sad about Iwata, and we all found all these examples of things that Iwata did that were beautiful and amazing. But there are so few of those people that, and that is itself a tragedy that we don't understand these people greater. And through the critical sphere is how we can sometimes come to understand. We understand a person's positions and their perspectives and their values and what they love and what they cherish and what they want to see more of. When Roger Ebert died, it was so fucking sad. Everybody was so sad, and it was partially because, the one film guy died, and that's we all knew him, but also it was sad because but through his criticism and through his writing and everything, we got an understanding of who he was as a person, and you feel touched by that individual, and that is so rare in games, and I think that is why it is important and valuable to have people who are operating on both sides of that divide.
I think what comes to mind is Ryan Davis.
Yeah.
That community is only just coming to heal from the loss of that man. And it was because he was able to convey the kind of person he was through the development of this pioneer, venue. Like, Giant Bomb was one of the first personality-driven gaming criticism sites. So it was a very privileged access to a specific group of people. But now it's, I guess, because there's so many ways to do that too. It seems like that's harder. Like, it's more difficult for that to happen again. For one person to have that kind of an impact, or to convey that much about themselves and their criticism, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what that could be done about that, except continuing to move away from sort of the expectations and standards set by kind of studio and self-imposed restrictions. I think moving further and further away from that and into kind of a flexible, nebulous job sensibility can really enrich both sides of that conversation.
Any closing thoughts?
No, I think that's it. I'm sorry for talking so much about Kojima. I know that people...
You didn't talk that much about Kojima. It's okay.
I can talk more about Kojima.
Well, we got time.
So in Metal Gear Solid 2, when we really start to... No, I'm not going to do this. Postmodernism. So, yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, do you want to take us out of here?
Sure. If you don't already, and you want to follow us on Twitter.com, you can find me at OHPORPUP, OHPOORPUP.
I have an account at Twitter at Sophia Park with an underscore, Sophia with a PH, of course.
And you can find us on Patreon and support us there at patreon.com/metagame.fun. DOTFUN.
Likewise, Metagame has a Twitter at metagame.fun, all spelled out, and the site itself is metagame.fun, but as a URL.
It's a real dot.
Yeah.
It's
it's not written in at that time.
Yeah, just poke it in there.
That would be something.
Poke your computer screen. That's how you make periods, right? On your phone. That's how you do it on the phone. Don't question me.
All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I did.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. It was good.
And we'll see you next time.